What is this? The renowned pianist, Vincent Harrington, stood from his cushioned seat in the front row, his voice dripping with disdain. Security. Who let the help's child onto the stage? The 14-year-old boy met his gaze without flinching. I'm here to accept your challenge, sir. You said anyone could try. Laughter erupted through the audience, wealthy patrons in glittering gowns and tailored suits. My dear boy, Vincent sneered, adjusting his silk cravat, this instrument costs more than your mother makes in a decade. I suggest you run along before you embarrass yourself. I'll take that chance. The maestro's smile turned cruel. Very well. Let's see what the maid's son can do. What happened next silenced an entire room of skeptics and shattered every assumption they'd ever made. Dear viewer, I humbly request you to watch or listen till the end and rate this story out of 10. Your rating will help me to give you better stories in next videos. If you are watching my story for the first time, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The Grandview Center for the Performing Arts stood like a monument to wealth and privilege on Fifth Avenue, its marble columns gleaming under the afternoon sun. Inside its walls, the annual Harrington Foundation Gala was in full preparation, an event where New York's elite gathered to celebrate classical music and, more importantly, to be seen celebrating it. 14-year-old Marcus Williams pushed a cleaning cart through the servants' corridor, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished floors. His mother, Janet, walked ahead of him, her arms full of fresh linens for the VIP lounge. They'd been working at the Grandview for 3 years now, ever since his father passed away, leaving them with medical bills that seemed to multiply like weeds. Marcus, baby, make sure you stay in the back areas tonight, his mother said, glancing over her shoulder. Her voice carried that familiar note of worry that he'd grown accustomed to. Mr. Harrington is particular about the staff being visible during events. I know, Mama. Marcus had heard the rules 100 times. Be invisible. Be quiet. Be grateful for the opportunity to scrub toilets in a building where people spent more on a single ticket than his mother made in a month. They entered the main hall, and Marcus's breath caught despite having seen it countless times before. The concert hall was a masterpiece of architecture, a soaring ceiling painted with scenes from classical mythology, crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow prisms across the room, and at the center of the stage, the crown jewel, a Steinway Model D concert grand piano, its ebony surface so perfectly polished that it reflected the lights like a mirror. Beautiful, isn't it? His mother's voice had softened. She knew what that piano meant to him. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. Every time he saw it, his fingers itched to touch those keys, to feel the weight of them, to hear the sound that such a perfect instrument could produce. At home, he practiced on an old Casio keyboard he'd found at a thrift store, half the keys stuck, and it was missing the stand, so he had to prop it up on milk crates. But even that battered piece of equipment felt like magic when he played. Marcus Williams. A sharp voice cut through his reverie. Are you daydreaming again, boy? Gerald Hastings, the facility manager, strode toward them, his face pinched with perpetual irritation. He was a thin man with a thin mustache and an even thinner patience for what he called help that doesn't know their place. No, sir, Mr. Hastings, Marcus replied quickly, straightening his posture. Then why are you standing there gawking like a tourist? Your mother has work to do, and you're holding her up. Hastings's eyes narrowed. The Harrington Gala begins in 4 hours. If I find one speck of dust, one smudge on any surface, you'll both be looking for new employment. Am I clear? Yes, sir, Janet said, her voice steady but her hand tightening around the linens she carried. As Hastings stalked away, Marcus caught his mother's arm. Mama, one day I'm going to play on that stage. I'm going to show everyone. Hush now, she interrupted gently, but her eyes were sad. Baby, we can't afford those kinds of dreams. Your keyboard at home, that's enough. You practice, you enjoy it, but this. She gestured at the grand piano, this world isn't meant for people like us. But I'm good, Mama. You know I am. Mrs. Chen said. Mrs. Chen is a kind woman who gives you free lessons because she feels sorry for us, Janet said, her voice firmer now. And I'm grateful for that, truly. But Marcus, these people. She nodded toward the growing crowd of workers preparing the hall. They'll never see you as anything but the help son. The sooner you accept that, the less it'll hurt. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to tell her about the music he heard in his head, the compositions he'd been writing on scraps of paper, the way his fingers could make even that broken keyboard sing. But the exhaustion in his mother's eyes stopped him. She worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, cleaning at the Grandview during the day and taking night shifts at a hotel near the airport. The last thing she needed was her son chasing impossible dreams. I'll get back to work, he said quietly. The afternoon passed in a blur of polishing, dusting, and arranging. Marcus worked in the upper balconies, cleaning the private boxes where the wealthiest patrons would sit, far above the common ticket holders. Through the windows, he could see the city stretching out below, a maze of buildings and possibilities that felt just as distant as the stage below. As evening approached, the hall began to transform. Women in gowns that cost more than a year's rent glided through the doors, their jewelry catching the light. Men in tuxedos laughed and shook hands, their voices booming with the confidence that came from never having to worry about money. And at the center of it all stood Vincent Harrington himself. Marcus watched from the shadows of the upper balcony as the maestro held court. Vincent Harrington was 50 years old but carried himself like royalty. His silver hair was swept back perfectly, his tuxedo custom-tailored, and his hands, those famous hands that had played for presidents and princes, gestured expressively as he spoke. The tragedy of modern education, Harrington's voice carried easily through the acoustically perfect hall, is that we've democratized art. We've told every child with opposable thumbs that they can be musicians. It's absurd. True musical genius is rare, inherited through bloodlines of culture and refinement. You can't teach what must be bred. The crowd around him murmured in agreement. A woman in a diamond necklace laughed. So true, Vincent. Just last week, my neighbor suggested her daughter could be a concert pianist. The child is 12 and has been playing for only 2 years. Can you imagine? I shudder to think, Harrington replied, his tone dripping with aristocratic disdain. The piano is not a toy for the masses. It's an instrument of sophistication that requires not just technical skill but cultural understanding. Something that simply cannot exist outside certain environments. Marcus felt his jaw clench. He knew what Harrington meant, even if the maestro was too refined to say it outright. People like Marcus, poor, black, from the wrong side of the city, weren't supposed to understand classical music. They weren't supposed to feel it in their bones, to hear the conversations between Bach and Beethoven across centuries, to understand the mathematical precision of a perfect fugue. Young man, you shouldn't be here. Marcus spun around to find an elderly security guard looking at him with kind eyes. The gala is starting soon. Staff needs to be in their designated areas. Yes, sir. I was just finishing the boxes. I know what you were doing, the guard said, not unkindly. I've seen you watching the stage. You play. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. A little. Taught myself, mostly. And Mrs. Chen gives me lessons sometimes. Mary Chen. The old piano teacher from Chinatown. The guard smiled. She's a good woman. Tough, but fair. If she's teaching you, you must have some talent. I try, Marcus said softly. Listen, kid, Marcus, right? At Marcus's nod, he continued, I've worked here for 30 years. Seen a lot of young people with dreams walk through these doors. Some of them make it, most don't. But the ones who do. They all have one thing in common, they don't give up, no matter who tells them they don't belong. You remember that. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted from the stage area. Raised voices echoed through the hall, and Marcus and the guard hurried to the balcony railing to see what was happening. "This is absolutely unacceptable." Harrington's voice had lost its cultured smoothness, replaced by raw anger. "Where is Stephen? The performance begins in 30 minutes. Gerald Hastings rushed onto the stage, his face pale. "Mr. Harrington, I've just received word. Mr. Kozlov is stuck in traffic from the airport. There was an accident on the highway. He's not going to make it." The crowd gasped. Stefan Kozlov was supposed to be Harrington's dueling partner for the evening centerpiece, a dramatic performance where two pianists engaged in a musical battle, each trying to outplay the other in increasingly complex pieces. It was the gala's main attraction. The reason tickets cost $5,000 each. "Then get me another pianist," Harrington snapped. "Surely among these music lovers, someone can adequately play a few simple pieces." An uncomfortable silence filled the hall. These were people who paid to watch music, not people who could create it. Finally, a man in the front row stood up, Richard Pemberton, a hedge fund manager whose face Marcus recognized from the society pages his mother sometimes left lying around their apartment. "Vincent, I took lessons as a boy," Pemberton said hesitantly. "I'm quite rusty, but perhaps." "Sit down, Richard," Harrington said coldly. "I need a pianist, not a child's recital. This is a professional performance, not a charity event." The insult hung in the air. Pemberton's face reddened, but he sat down without another word. That was Harrington's power. He could humiliate even the wealthy, and they'd take it because his approval was worth more than their pride. Suddenly, Harrington's eyes gleamed with an idea. "Ladies and gentlemen, what if we turned this disaster into an opportunity? What if, instead of a predetermined dueling partner, I opened a challenge to anyone at all, who believes they have the skill to match me?" He smiled, and there was cruelty in it. "I'll even make it interesting. If someone can play something that genuinely impresses me, I'll donate $100,000 to the charity of their choice. But when they fail, and they will fail, they must leave immediately, in front of everyone, with the knowledge that they were never meant to touch such an instrument." The crowd buzzed with excitement. This was even better than the planned performance, live humiliation, public failure, all wrapped in the guise of opportunity. Marcus felt his heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment he'd been dreaming about, preparing for, living for. Every night on that broken keyboard, every lesson with Mrs. Chen where she'd pushed him until his fingers ached, every composition he'd written on scraps of paper, it had all been leading here. But his mother's words echoed in his mind, "This world isn't meant for people like us." The security guard beside him seemed to read his thoughts. "Don't do it, son. Men like Harrington, they don't give real chances. They just want to remind everyone of their place." Marcus watched as Harrington surveyed the crowd, his expression smug. No one was taking the challenge. Of course they weren't. The wealthy didn't need to prove themselves, and everyone else knew better than to try. "As I suspected," Harrington said after a long moment. "There are no takers because there are no equals. Very well, we'll postpone. I'll play." The words left Marcus's mouth before he fully realized he'd said them. The security guard grabbed his arm, but Marcus pulled away and stepped forward to the balcony railing, his voice stronger now. "I'll take your challenge, Mr. Harrington." Every head in the hall turned upward. The crowd seemed to notice him for the first time, this 14-year-old black boy in a janitorial uniform, standing in the balcony where he clearly didn't belong. Harrington's face went through a rapid series of expressions, surprise, confusion, and finally, cold amusement. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Marcus Williams, sir." His voice didn't shake, even though his knees felt weak. "And I'd like to accept your challenge." The silence that followed Marcus's declaration felt heavier than stone. Every eye in the Grandview Center fixed upon him, some curious, most skeptical, and a few openly hostile. He could feel their judgments weighing on him like physical objects, this child, this cleaner's son, this boy who didn't belong. Vincent Harrington tilted his head, studying Marcus as one might study an unusual insect. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, not warm, but rather the smile of a cat that had just spotted a particularly entertaining mouse. "Marcus Williams," Harrington repeated, his voice carrying effortlessly through the acoustically perfect hall. "And tell me, Marcus Williams, where exactly did you study? Juilliard? The Curtis Institute? Perhaps you're a prodigy from some European conservatory I've yet to hear about." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus felt heat rising to his cheeks but forced himself to maintain eye contact with the maestro. "I'm self-taught, mostly, sir. And I take lessons from Mrs. Mary Chen in Chinatown." "Mary Chen?" Harrington's eyebrows shot up in theatrical surprise. "Oh, I know Mary. Competent teacher, I suppose, for beginners. She once applied to teach at this very institution, you know. We rejected her application. Not quite, up to our standards." He paused, letting the insult settle. "And you say you're self-taught? On what, pray tell? A toy piano? A smartphone app? A Casio keyboard, sir. And I practice every night after my homework and chores." The laughter grew louder now. A woman in a fur stole turned to her companion. "Did you hear that? A Casio keyboard. That's like learning surgery with a butter knife." "My dear boy," Harrington said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "I admire your ambition. Truly, I do. But there's a vast difference between plinking out chopsticks on an electronic toy and performing on a professional concert grand piano. The touch sensitivity alone would defeat you. Do you even know what I mean by touch sensitivity?" "Yes, sir," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the mocking laughter. "It refers to how the piano responds to the velocity and pressure of the keystroke. Harder strikes produce louder volumes, softer touches create gentler sounds. It's about the dynamic range and the ability to express subtle variations in tone and emotion through physical interaction with the keys." The laughter faltered. Harrington's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well," the maestro said, "you can regurgitate definitions. How impressive. But knowing the terminology and executing the technique are entirely different matters. Tell me, have you ever actually played on a Steinway Model D?" "No, sir. Of course not. Do you know how much this instrument costs? $175,000. It's been voiced and regulated by master technicians. The hammers are made from virgin wool felt, the soundboard from Sitka spruce. Each key requires exactly 50 grams of pressure to depress. It's not a toy, boy. It's a precision instrument that takes years of professional training to master." "I understand that, sir. But you offered a challenge to anyone, and I'd like to try." Harrington glanced at his audience, many of whom were now leaning forward with interest. This was turning into better entertainment than the planned dueling performance. The maestro was too savvy a showman to waste such an opportunity. "Very well," Harrington said, spreading his arms magnanimously. "Let no one say that Vincent Harrington denied opportunity to the ambitious, however misguided. Please, come down to the stage. Everyone, please welcome our challenger." Smattering applause followed Marcus as he made his way down from the balcony. His legs felt like water, but he forced them to move. As he descended the stairs, he caught sight of his mother emerging from a side door, her face stricken with horror. "Marcus, no," she mouthed, shaking her head frantically. But there was no turning back now. He'd thrown down the gauntlet, and the entire elite world of New York's classical music scene was watching to see him fall. The walk across the concert hall floor to the stage felt endless. Marcus was acutely aware of his janitor's uniform, the cheap polyester pants, the shirt with his name embroidered on the pocket, the scuffed sneakers that squeaked on the polished marble. Around him, silk and diamonds and $1,000 shoes. He was a stain on their perfect picture. "Careful on those stairs, boy," Harrington called out as Marcus climbed to the stage. The stage lights are quite expensive. We wouldn't want you to damage anything. More laughter. Marcus reached the stage and found himself standing 10 feet from the Steinway. Up close, it was even more magnificent than he'd imagined. The finish was so perfect he could see his reflection in it, a distorted, funhouse version of himself that somehow felt appropriate. Harrington moved to stand beside him, and Marcus realized how much taller and more imposing the maestro was in person. The man radiated confidence and authority, every inch of him screaming that he belonged in this space, on this stage, in this world. Before we begin this experiment, Harrington said, addressing the crowd, let me explain what we'll be doing. I'm going to play a piece, and then young Marcus here will attempt to play it back. We'll start with something simple, perhaps Für Elise. Everyone knows that one. Then, if by some miracle he succeeds, we'll progress to more challenging pieces. Does that sound fair, Marcus? Yes, sir. Excellent. And remember, everyone, when he fails, and he will fail, we've all witnessed what happens when ambition exceeds ability. It's a valuable lesson. Harrington turned to Marcus, his voice dropping to a whisper that only the boy could hear. You're going to humiliate yourself and your mother in front of 400 people. I'm giving you one last chance to walk away with some dignity. Marcus met his gaze. I'm ready to play, sir. Harrington's expression hardened. So be it. The maestro sat at the piano, adjusted his position with the practiced ease of a man who'd done this thousands of times, and placed his hands on the keys. The audience fell completely silent. Even the waitstaff in the wings stopped moving. Harrington began to play Beethoven's Für Elise. But this wasn't the simple, plodding version that beginners learned. This was Für Elise as it was meant to be played, with all its delicate trills, its subtle dynamic variations, its hidden complexities. Harrington's fingers danced across the keys, his body swaying slightly with the music. He added slight retardandos that weren't in the sheet music, personal interpretations that spoke of decades of study and performance. It was beautiful. It was also intimidating as hell. The piece lasted about 3 minutes. When Harrington finished, he lifted his hands from the keys with a flourish and stood, gesturing toward the piano bench. Your turn. And do try not to break anything. Marcus approached the piano, his heart hammering so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He sat on the bench, leather, he noticed absently, soft and perfectly positioned, and adjusted his position. The bench was too high for him, Harrington was taller. But Marcus didn't want to fiddle with it and look even more amateurish than everyone already thought he was. He looked down at the keys. 88 of them, stretching before him like a challenge and a promise. His fingers trembled slightly as he raised them to the keyboard. Whenever you're ready, Harrington said, his tone suggesting he expected to be waiting a very long time. Marcus took a breath, closed his eyes for just a moment, and let everything else fall away. The crowd, the judgment, the fear, all of it vanished. There was only the music. He began to play. The first notes rang out clear and pure, and Marcus felt the difference immediately. This wasn't like his Casio keyboard at home, where he had to compensate for sticky keys and uneven response. This was like the difference between walking and flying. Every key responded exactly as he intended, the sound blooming from the instrument in a way that took his breath away. He played Für Elise exactly as Harrington had played it, every trill, every dynamic shift, every subtle interpretation. His fingers moved with confidence born from countless hours of practice, his muscle memory translating instantly from the inferior instrument at home to this magnificent piano. But more than that, he felt the music. He understood what Beethoven had been trying to say when he composed this piece, the tender affection, the hint of melancholy, the complexity hidden beneath apparent simplicity. And he poured that understanding into his performance. When he played the final notes and lifted his hands from the keys, the silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the silence of waiting for failure. This was the silence of shock. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at Harrington. The maestro's face had gone completely blank, all expression wiped away as if someone had erased it. Around them, the audience sat frozen, not knowing how to react. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Just one person, from somewhere in the back. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire hall was applauding, not the polite golf clap of society events, but genuine, surprised applause. Harrington's jaw tightened. "Luck," he said quietly, but his voice carried. "You memorized one piece. Let's see how you do with something you don't know." He sat back down at the piano, his movements sharp now, aggressive. "Let's try something a bit more challenging, shall we?" His fingers crashed down on the keys, and suddenly he was playing Chopin's Revolutionary Etude, a piece known for its technical difficulty, its rapid left-hand passages, its demands for both speed and precision. It was a piece that took advanced students years to master. Harrington played it furiously, almost violently, his hands moving so fast they blurred. He wasn't just playing anymore, he was making a statement. This is what real skill looks like. This is the difference between us. Know your place. When he finished, breathing slightly hard, he stood and gestured to the bench. "After you." Marcus stood frozen. He'd heard the Revolutionary Etude before, of course. He'd studied recordings of it, had even attempted it on his keyboard at home. But this was different. This was sight reading at the professional level, expected to replicate a piece that pianists spent months perfecting, and doing it in front of an audience that was now watching him like vultures waiting for a meal. "What's wrong?" Harrington asked, his voice carrying across the silent hall. Suddenly not so confident. "It's okay to admit you're out of your depth. No shame in knowing your limits." Marcus looked at his mother in the wings. She was crying silently, her hand pressed to her mouth. He could walk away now. He could admit defeat, leave the stage, and things would go back to normal. He'd remain invisible, and his mother wouldn't have to watch her son be destroyed. But then he saw something else in her face. Behind the tears, behind the fear, there was hope. She didn't think he'd succeed. But she hoped he would. "I'll play," Marcus said. He sat at the piano once more. This time, he adjusted the bench, bringing it down to a height that worked better for him. If he was going to fail, he'd fail on his own terms. Marcus placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Revolutionary Etude thundered from the Steinway, and Marcus felt the power of the instrument surge through his fingertips. This wasn't gentle Beethoven anymore, this was controlled chaos, musical fury demanding absolute technical precision and emotional depth simultaneously. His left hand flew across the lower registers in rapid chromatic passages, the ascending and descending lines that gave the piece its revolutionary fire. His right hand carved out the melodic line with strength, each note a declaration. The muscle memory he built on his inferior keyboard at home translated differently here, better, clearer, more powerful than he'd ever imagined possible. He could feel Chopin's intention in the piece, written in the wake of the November uprising when Russian forces crushed Poland's bid for independence. This wasn't just technical showmanship, it was rage and sorrow and defiance all woven together in musical form. And Marcus understood that. He understood what it meant to feel powerless against systems designed to keep you down. His fingers navigated the treacherous passages, the ones that trapped even experienced pianists in wrong notes and muddy pedaling. But Marcus had studied this piece obsessively, had broken it down into its component parts, had practiced each hand separately until they could function independently. Now they came together in triumphant synchronization. The modulations flowed naturally, the dynamic swells building to the climactic moments before resolving into softer passages. He could hear Mrs. Chen's voice in his head, "Don't just play the notes, Marcus. Tell the story. Make them feel what Chopin felt." As he approached the final section, the technically most demanding part where the left-hand arpeggios reached their highest velocity, Marcus did something unexpected. He added his own slight interpretation, a brief hesitation before the final thunderous chords, like a breath before battle, then crashed into the ending with every ounce of passion he possessed. The final chords resonated through the hall, the Steinway superior soundboard allowing the notes to hang in the air like a question that demanded an answer. Marcus lifted his hands from the keys and looked up. The silence lasted 3 full seconds, an eternity in performance time. Then the hall erupted. People were on their feet. Not everyone, but enough. The applause was louder now, more enthusiastic, punctuated with a few shouts of "Bravo." A woman in the third row had tears streaming down her face. Even the waitstaff in the wings were clapping. But not everyone was pleased. Marcus could see faces in the crowd, pinched, uncomfortable, even angry. These people had come expecting to watch a child be humiliated, to have their worldview confirmed. Instead, they were being forced to confront something that didn't fit their narrative. And Vincent Harrington's face had transformed into something cold and hard as marble. "Adequate," the maestro said, his voice cutting through the applause like a knife. The crowd quieted. "You've clearly practiced that piece. Perhaps you've been preparing for this moment, hoping for some opportunity to show off. But let's see how you handle something truly challenging. Something that requires not just technical skill but artistic maturity that someone your age simply cannot possess." Harrington sat at the piano once more, his movements precise and controlled. When he began to play, Marcus felt his stomach drop. It was Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, Op. 3, No. 2, one of the most emotionally complex pieces in the classical repertoire. Known as "The Bells of Moscow," it required not just technical proficiency but deep interpretive understanding. The piece was dark, brooding, building from ominous bells to a crushing climax before resolving into resigned melancholy. Harrington played it masterfully. His years of experience showed in every phrase, every calculated rubato, every perfectly calibrated dynamic. He made the piano sing and weep, made it sound like entire orchestras, made it conjure images of cathedrals and midnight and fate itself bearing down with inexorable weight. When he finished, even the hostile members of the audience couldn't help but applaud. This was why Vincent Harrington commanded such respect and such prices. This was artistry at its highest level. "Now then," Harrington said, standing and fixing Marcus with a look of pure challenge. "Let's see if you can replicate that. And before you sit down, let me remind everyone here what we're witnessing. This young man, this child, claims he can match someone with 30 years of professional experience, someone who has studied with the greatest masters of our age, someone who has performed at Carnegie Hall, the Royal Albert Hall, and the Vienna Musikverein." He turned to the audience. "What we're really seeing is the Dunning-Kruger effect in action, incompetence so profound it cannot recognize its own limitations." The crowd laughed, the spell of his performance still fresh. They were back on his side now, ready to watch the natural order reassert itself. Marcus approached the piano, but this time Gerald Hastings appeared from the wings, his face flushed. "That's quite enough," Hastings said sharply, grabbing Marcus's arm. "You've had your fun, boy. Mr. Harrington has been generous enough to indulge you, but this has gone on long enough. You're disrupting the gala, and your mother and I both are going to have serious conversations about your behavior." "Wait." The voice came from the audience, Richard Pemberton, the hedge fund manager Harrington had humiliated earlier. He stood from his seat, his expression thoughtful. "Vincent, you issued a challenge. Anyone who could genuinely impress you would receive a $100,000 donation to their chosen charity. Are you backing out of your own challenge?" "Don't be absurd, Richard," Harrington said smoothly. "But there's a difference between issuing a sporting challenge and allowing a child to waste everyone's time." "Let him play," another voice called out. This time it was Catherine Worthington, a prominent philanthropist known for her support of arts education. "I'd like to see what he can do." "As would I," someone else added. The crowd was divided now. Some wanted Marcus to continue, curious to see if lightning could strike 3 times. Others clearly wanted this disruption to end so they could return to their comfortable world where everyone knew their place. Harrington's eyes narrowed dangerously, but he was too clever to refuse now. Very well. One more piece. But when you fail, Marcus, you leave this hall immediately and never return. You and your mother will find employment elsewhere. Those are the stakes. Do you accept? Marcus felt the weight of that threat. His mother's job. Their income. The roof over their heads. Everything balanced on whether he could play one more piece perfectly. Marcus, don't, his mother called from the wings, no longer caring about protocol. Baby, please, it's not worth it. But Marcus knew something everyone else in this room didn't know. For the past 3 years, since his father's death, music had been the only thing keeping him going. When the world felt crushing and hopeless, when the other kids at school mocked his second-hand clothes and his mother's job, when the future looked like nothing but an endless repetition of poverty and struggle, music had been his escape, his hope, his proof that beauty could exist even in broken places. He'd studied Rachmaninoff's Prelude obsessively. He'd listened to every major recording, Horowitz, Ashkenazy, Lugansky, Volodov's. He'd analyzed the score, understanding its structure, its harmonic progressions, its emotional architecture. And he'd practiced it on his broken Casio keyboard, imagining what it would sound like on a real piano, dreaming of this exact moment even though he'd never believed it would actually come. I accept, Marcus said. He sat at the piano and placed his hands on the keys. The opening required absolute control, slow, measured chords that evoked the deep tolling of bells. Each chord had to resonate fully before the next one began, creating that sense of vast, ominous space. Marcus began to play, and immediately he poured everything into it. Not just technical precision, but something deeper. He played his father's death and the hollow sound of hospital machinery. He played his mother's exhaustion after 16-hour shifts. He played the weight of poverty and the way it crushed dreams before they could fully form. He played every moment of being invisible, being dismissed, being told that people like him weren't supposed to want things like this. But he also played hope. He played the beauty of Mrs. Chen's patience as she taught him proper fingering. He played the joy of discovering a new piece of music, of understanding it, of making it his own. He played the dream that someday, somehow, talent might actually matter more than where you came from. The piece built toward its climax, those thunderous middle sections where the piano had to sound like all the bells of Moscow ringing at once. Marcus's hands moved across the entire range of the keyboard, his body swaying with the effort, his face intense with concentration. And then, the resolution. The piece returned to its opening theme, but transformed now, quieter, sadder, resigned. The bells faded to echoes, and those final chords carried the weight of acceptance and grief and a beauty too profound for words. Marcus played the last note and held it, letting it fade naturally into silence. Only when it had completely dissipated did he lift his hands from the keys. The silence that followed wasn't like before. This wasn't shock or confusion. This was the silence of people confronting something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the world. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the hall, someone began to clap. Slowly at first, then faster. Others joined in. Within moments, the entire hall was on its feet, every single person, even those who clearly wished they didn't have to stand. The applause was thunderous, genuine, the kind reserved for moments when something truly extraordinary has occurred. Marcus looked up at Vincent Harrington. The maestro hadn't moved. He stood beside the piano, his face completely expressionless, his hands at his sides. Finally, after the applause had continued for nearly a minute, Harrington raised a hand for silence. The crowd gradually quieted, sitting back down, all eyes fixed on him. Well, Harrington said, his voice carefully controlled, that was certainly competent. Competent? Catherine Worthington stood again, her voice sharp with disbelief. Vincent, that was extraordinary. I've heard you play that piece dozens of times, and this child matched you note for note. More than matched, he brought something genuine to it. He replicated what I played, Harrington snapped, his composure slipping for the first time. Anyone can mimic if they try hard enough. I wasn't just replicating, Marcus said quietly. The hall went silent. Every eye turned to him. It was incredibly disrespectful for him to interrupt, but he'd already broken so many rules tonight that one more didn't matter. I was interpreting, Marcus continued, his voice stronger now. That's what music is. It's not about perfect replication. It's about understanding what the composer was trying to say and adding your own voice to that conversation. Rachmaninoff wrote this piece when he was 19, right after a performance of his first symphony failed so badly it nearly destroyed him. This prelude is about despair and bells and beauty in darkness. I understood that because. He paused, searching for words, because I've felt that too. Harrington's face had gone red. How dare you presume to lecture me about musical interpretation? I've been performing since before you were born. I know, sir. And you're brilliant. What you played was perfect. But music isn't just about being perfect. It's about being true. Vincent Harrington stared at Marcus with an intensity that seemed to compress all the oxygen in the room. Around them, the audience sat in rapt attention, sensing that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple musical challenge. This was a confrontation between worlds, between philosophies, between everything Harrington represented and everything Marcus threatened. Being true, Harrington repeated, his voice dangerously soft. You've been playing piano for what, 3 years? 4. And you presume to tell me, a man who has dedicated his entire life to this art, about truth in music? I'm not trying to tell you anything, sir, Marcus said, though his heart was pounding. I'm just saying what I believe. What you believe. Harrington laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let me tell you what I believe, Marcus Williams. I believe that talent without proper training is like a diamond still trapped in rock, potential, perhaps, but ultimately worthless without the right hands to shape it. I believe that music at this level requires not just aptitude but cultivation, education, exposure to culture and refinement that simply cannot be acquired from a keyboard in. He paused meaningfully, wherever it is you live. The South Bronx, Marcus said evenly. I live in the South Bronx. A murmur ran through the crowd. To these people, the South Bronx might as well have been another planet, a place they drove past on highways but never actually entered, a name synonymous with everything they'd been taught to fear and dismiss. The South Bronx, Harrington repeated, as if the words themselves proved his point. And tell me, what cultural opportunities does the South Bronx offer for classical music? What concerts have you attended? What masterclasses? What exposure to the great tradition you presume to be part of? I listen to recordings, Marcus said. I study scores at the public library. I watch videos online of performances. And Mrs. Chin teaches me. Recordings. Libraries. The Internet. Harrington turned to address the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, this is precisely the problem with modern education. We've convinced people that watching videos is the same as actual study, that self-teaching is equivalent to proper instruction. It's like someone claiming to be a doctor because they read WebMD. Laughter rippled through parts of the crowd. But Marcus noticed that not everyone was laughing. Catherine Worthington's expression was thoughtful, almost sympathetic. Several other faces showed uncertainty, as if they weren't quite sure what to think anymore. Mr. Harrington, came a new voice from the audience. An elderly black man stood, dressed in a simple but well-maintained suit. My name is Dr. James Crawford. I'm a professor of music history at Columbia University. I've been listening very carefully this evening, and I have to say, that young man's interpretation of the Rachmaninoff was not merely competent. It showed genuine understanding of the piece's historical context and emotional core. That's not something you get from mimicry. Harrington's eyes flashed dangerously. With all due respect, Dr. Crawford, understanding context and executing at a professional level are two entirely different things. Yes, the boy can play. I'll grant him that. But there are levels to this art that simply cannot be reached without the proper foundation. Then give him that foundation, Catherine Worthington said, standing once more. Vincent, you run the Harrington Foundation. You have scholarship programs, mentorship opportunities. If this young man has such raw talent, why not help him develop it properly? Because, Harrington said sharply, then seemed to catch himself. He smoothed his expression back into something more controlled. Because there are hundreds of talented young people who apply to our programs every year. Students who have already proven themselves through years of dedicated study at recognized institutions. Students who understand the commitment required. What makes this boy more deserving than any of them? Maybe the fact that he taught himself to play like this on a broken keyboard. Dr. Crawford suggested quietly. I've trained musicians for 40 years, Vincent. Real talent is rare. Real talent combined with that kind of determination is even rarer. When you find it, you nurture it, regardless of where it comes from. Easy to say from an academic's perspective, Harrington countered. In the real world of professional performance, raw talent isn't enough. You need polish, refinement, the ability to navigate complex social dynamics. You need to understand the culture of classical music, which is built on centuries of European tradition, built on centuries of gatekeeping, you mean, interrupted another voice. This time it was a younger woman, perhaps 30, with sharp features and sharper eyes. I'm Jessica Huang, arts critic for The Times. Mr. Harrington, I've reviewed 17 of your performances over the past 5 years, and they've all been technically brilliant. But you want to know what I thought watching this kid play? I thought, when was the last time Harrington made me actually feel something? The crowd gasped. You didn't openly criticize Vincent Harrington to his face, not if you wanted to maintain access to the upper echelons of New York's classical music scene. Harrington's face had gone very pale, then very red. I'm sorry you found my performances lacking in emotion, Ms. Huang. Perhaps your expectations have been calibrated by the sort of melodramatic showmanship that passes for artistry in popular culture. Or perhaps, Dr. Crawford interjected, emotion is exactly what classical music needs right now. We've spent decades making it so rarefied, so untouchable, that we've driven away entire generations of potential listeners. Meanwhile, we wonder why concert halls are dying and orchestras are going bankrupt. This is absurd, Harrington snapped. We're not going to lower our standards just to appeal to mass audiences. Classical music is meant to be challenging, sophisticated. It's meant to be universal, Marcus said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. He'd been standing silently near the piano, watching this debate rage around him like he was in the eye of a hurricane. Now he stepped forward, his voice small but clear. When Beethoven wrote music, he didn't write it just for rich people, Marcus continued. He wrote it for everyone. That's why his Ninth Symphony uses Ode to Joy, a poem about all of humanity being brothers. When Chopin wrote his revolutionary etude, he wasn't thinking about concert halls. He was thinking about his country being destroyed. Music is supposed to speak to people, to make them feel things. The minute you make it only for certain people, you've killed what makes it special. You're 14 years old, Harrington said coldly. You have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe not about everything, Marcus agreed. But I know how music makes me feel. I know that when I play, I'm not trying to show off or prove I'm better than anyone. I'm trying to communicate something that I can't say with words. And I think that's what the great composers wanted too. The great composers, Harrington said with exaggerated patience, were products of their time and culture. They studied for years under masters. They had access to the finest instruments, the best education, the cultural milieu that allowed their genius to flourish. You cannot separate the art from the conditions that created it. But sir, Marcus said, isn't that the point? That even though they came from that world, their music transcended it. Bach was a church organist in a small German town, but his music speaks to people everywhere. Mozart was Austrian, but Japanese kids study his compositions. Music doesn't care where you're from or what you look like. It just is. For a long moment, Harrington didn't respond. He stood very still, his jaw working, clearly fighting some internal battle. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was like ice. "You want to know the truth, Marcus Williams? The real truth?" He stepped closer to Marcus, towering over him. "You played well tonight. Better than well. You have talent, genuine talent. But talent isn't enough in this world. It never has been. This industry, this art form, operates on networks and connections and cultural capital that you simply don't have and never will have. You could practice for 10,000 hours, and you still wouldn't be able to open the doors that trust fund children open with a single phone call." He gestured around the hall. "Look at this audience. Do you see a single person who looks like you? This isn't because there aren't talented black musicians, we both know there are. It's because this world has very specific requirements for entry, requirements that have nothing to do with how well you play. You need the right schools, the right teachers, the right connections. You need parents who can afford to send you to summer programs in Europe and buy you instruments that cost more than cars." "So you're saying I should just give up?" Marcus asked. "That I should accept that no matter how hard I work, it won't matter because of where I come from?" "I'm saying you should be realistic," Harrington said. "I'm saying that you should find a path that's actually available to you. Get a good education. Find a stable job. Maybe teach music at a local school. There's no shame in that. But thinking you can just walk onto this stage and claim a place in a world that took centuries to build? That's not determination. That's delusion." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Because part of him had always feared they might be true. Part of him had always wondered if his dreams were just that, dreams, with no connection to reality. But then he remembered something Mrs. Chen had told him once. They'd been working on a particularly difficult passage from a Mozart sonata, and Marcus had been ready to give up, convinced he'd never get it right. "Marcus," she'd said, "in China, when I was young, they told girls that music was a hobby, not a career. They told me I should be practical, study something useful. But I knew that music was what I was meant to do. So I practiced harder than anyone. I proved them wrong. Not because I was exceptional, but because I refused to let other people's limitations become mine." Marcus looked up at Harrington and saw something in the maestro's eyes that he hadn't noticed before: fear. This man wasn't trying to protect the sanctity of classical music. He was trying to protect his own position in a hierarchy that Marcus's very existence threatened. Because if a poor black kid from the South Bronx could teach himself to play at this level, what did that say about all the expensive education and prestigious programs that formed the foundation of Harrington's world? What did it say about the entire system that guaranteed certain people success while denying others even the chance to try? "You're right," Marcus said quietly. "I don't have the connections or the money or the right background. But I have something you don't have anymore." "And what's that?" Harrington asked mockingly. "I have nothing to lose." The words hung in the air between them, simple but profound. Marcus watched understanding flicker across Vincent Harrington's face, and with it, a flash of something that might have been respect, quickly suppressed. "Nothing to lose," Harrington repeated slowly. "How very dramatic. Tell me, Marcus, what do you think happens next in this fairy tale you've constructed? You play 3 pieces adequately, and suddenly the doors of Carnegie Hall swing open. Agents line up to represent you. Recording contracts materialize from thin air." "I think," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "that I proved I can play. The rest is up to people like you, whether you'll let someone like me in, or whether you'll keep pretending talent only exists in people who already have everything." A cell phone camera flash went off somewhere in the audience. Then another. Marcus suddenly realized that dozens of people were recording this confrontation. This wasn't just happening in this room anymore, this was going out into the world, onto social media, where the gatekeepers had less control over the narrative. Harrington noticed too. His expression shifted, became more calculated. He was a performer, after all, and he understood audiences. The crowd was no longer entirely on his side, and any overt cruelty now would be captured and shared and potentially damage his carefully cultivated reputation. "You want the truth?" Harrington said, and now his voice carried a note of something almost like sincerity. "Here it is, the world of professional classical music is brutal. It chews up and spits out talented people every single day. People who've studied since they were 3 years old, who've won competitions, who've done everything right, they still fail. They still end up teaching lessons in strip malls or playing in hotel lobbies. That's the reality. I'm not trying to be cruel, I'm trying to save you from wasting years of your life on a dream that statistically won't happen." "But it could happen," Catherine Worthington said, still standing in the audience. "Vincent, you talk about statistics and reality, but every successful musician was once someone people doubted. You were once a young pianist trying to make it. Someone gave you a chance." "I was properly trained," Harrington shot back. "I attended Juilliard at 16. I won the Van Cliburn competition. I paid my dues through years of disciplined study." "Your father was Maxwell Harrington," Dr. Crawford interrupted. "The Maxwell Harrington who owned 3 concert halls and personally knew Leonard Bernstein. Let's not pretend you climbed the mountain alone, Vincent." The crowd murmured. This was information most people knew but politely didn't mention. Harrington had talent, certainly, but he'd also had advantages that most musicians could only dream of. Harrington's face tightened. "My father's connections opened doors. My talent kept them open. There's a difference." "And Marcus's talent?" Dr. Crawford pressed. "What will open doors for him? Or are we saying that in America, in 2025, we're still deciding who gets opportunities based on who their parents are?" "This is about classical music, not social justice," Harrington said sharply. "Maybe it should be about both," Jessica Huang said, still recording on her phone. "Classical music is dying, Vincent. Audiences are aging out, young people aren't interested, and institutions are struggling to survive. Maybe the problem isn't that kids like Marcus are trying to get in. Maybe the problem is that people like you are working so hard to keep them out." "I'm not keeping anyone out." Harrington's composure was cracking now. "The Harrington Foundation offers scholarships to underprivileged students every year. How many black students have received those scholarships in the past decade?" Dr. Crawford asked. Silence. "How many have graduated from your programs and gone on to professional careers?" More silence. "I thought so," Dr. Crawford said quietly. "You offer scholarships, but I bet they come with requirements that essentially screen out the kids who need them most. Expensive summer programs they can't attend. Instruments they can't afford. Requirements that they give up after-school jobs that their families depend on. You create the illusion of opportunity while maintaining every barrier that ensures nothing really changes." "That's not fair," Harrington said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "We have standards. We have to maintain excellence. Excellence as defined by whom?" Dr. Crawford stood and began walking toward the stage. He was older than Harrington, with gray hair and a slight limp, but he moved with quiet authority. "I've been part of this world for a long time, Vincent. I know how it works. I know how people talk in private about certain students being cultural fits or having the right background. I know how unconscious bias works because I've fought it my entire career." He reached the stage and looked at Marcus for the first time. "Son, how long have you been playing piano?" 3 years and 4 months, sir," Marcus said. "And you're entirely self-taught aside from lessons with Mary Chen?" "Yes, sir. Mrs. Chen gives me 1 lesson a week. I can't afford more." "1 lesson a week," Dr. Crawford repeated, turning back to the audience. "Most serious piano students at age 14 are having 3 or 4 lessons per week, plus group classes, plus ensemble experience. This child had 1 lesson a week and still managed to perform Rachmaninoff at a level that made this entire room take notice. Do you understand how extraordinary that is?" "It's impressive," Harrington admitted grudgingly. But impressive isn't enough. Stop saying that. The voice came from Marcus's mother, Janet, who had emerged fully from the wings now. Her face was streaked with tears, but her voice was strong. Stop telling my son that his best isn't enough. Stop telling him that he doesn't belong here. You don't know what he's sacrificed to get this far. You don't know how many nights he stayed up practicing when he should have been sleeping, how he's turned down every social opportunity because he needs to practice, how he's endured mockery from other kids who don't understand why he cares so much about dead white guy music. She walked onto the stage, standing beside her son. You want to talk about dedication? About sacrifice? Marcus practices 4 hours every day, before school, after homework, late into the night. He watches videos on his phone during lunch because we can't afford concert tickets. He saves every penny from odd jobs to buy sheet music instead of the sneakers all his friends have. He's 14 years old, and he's already worked harder than most people work in their entire lives. And you want to tell him it doesn't matter because he doesn't have the right address? Janet's voice broke. His father died 3 years ago. Cancer. We lost everything paying for treatments that didn't work. Marcus could have been angry. He could have given up on everything. But instead, he found music. He found hope. And now you want to take that away from him because it makes you uncomfortable. The hall was completely silent. Several people in the audience were openly crying now. Harrington looked at Janet, then at Marcus, and for the first time, the maestro's carefully maintained facade cracked. His eyes were suspiciously bright, his jaw clenched tight. He started, then stopped. Cleared his throat. I didn't know about your father. I'm sorry. Everyone has a story, Janet said. Everyone in this building has struggled with something, lost something, fought for something. But for some reason, when people like my son struggle, it's seen as a weakness. When people like you struggle, it's seen as character building. Why is that? Harrington didn't answer. He seemed to be wrestling with something internal, his face showing a battle between his ingrained beliefs and something else, maybe conscience, maybe recognition of his own privilege, maybe just the weight of being publicly confronted with his biases. Finally, Richard Pemberton stood up from the audience. The hedge fund manager who'd been humiliated earlier now spoke with careful deliberation. Vincent, you issued a challenge. You said anyone who impressed you would receive a $100,000 donation to their charity of choice. I think it's fair to say that Marcus has more than fulfilled that challenge. The question now is whether you're a man of your word. The crowd murmured agreement. Harrington was trapped, by his own hubris, by the cameras recording everything, by the expectations of his peers. Fine, Harrington said curtly. You win, Marcus. Which charity would you like the donation to go to? Marcus looked at his mother, then at Mrs. Chen, who had somehow made her way into the hall and was standing near the back, tears streaming down her weathered face. Then he looked at Dr. Crawford, at the other people of color scattered throughout the audience, a small minority in this overwhelmingly white space. I don't want a donation, Marcus said. Everyone stared at him in confusion. You don't want $100,000 for charity? Harrington asked incredulously. No, sir. I want something else. Marcus took a deep breath. I want you to teach me. The request landed like a bomb in the center of the elegant concert hall. For several long seconds, no one moved, no one spoke. They simply stared at Marcus Williams, this 14-year-old boy who had just asked Vincent Harrington, one of the most celebrated pianists of his generation, to become his teacher. Harrington's expression cycled through disbelief, outrage, and something that might have been panic before settling into cold amusement. Teach you, he repeated flatly. You want me to teach you? Yes, sir. Do you have any idea what my time is worth? What my private students pay for the privilege of studying with me? Harrington's voice rose. I have exactly 4 private students at any given time, each carefully selected from hundreds of applicants. They're all exceptional talents from prestigious music programs. They pay $50,000 per year for weekly lessons. And you want me to just take you on? You offered $100,000, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. That's 2 years of lessons. I'll take those 2 years, and I promise you won't regret it. Absolutely not, Harrington said immediately. The money was supposed to go to charity, not to fund some fantasy where I transform you into what? Dr. Crawford interrupted. Into the kind of musician you claim to value? Isn't that what teaching is supposed to be? Isn't that the entire purpose of the Harrington Foundation, to develop exceptional talent? I develop talent that's already been properly cultivated, Harrington shot back. I'm not running a remedial program for, he caught himself, but not before the unfinished sentence hung in the air, its implications clear to everyone listening. For kids like me? Marcus finished quietly. That's what you were going to say, isn't it? Harrington's face flushed. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Catherine Worthington's voice cut through the tension. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds exactly like what you meant. Vincent, I've known you for 15 years. I've donated millions to your foundation because I believed in its mission, to preserve and promote classical music for future generations. But what you're demonstrating right now is that you only care about a very specific subset of future generations. The ones who already look and sound and come from the same world you do. That's not true, Harrington protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Then prove it, Catherine said simply. Take Marcus as a student. Honor your commitment. Show us that the Harrington Foundation's mission statement about making classical music accessible to all talented young people regardless of background actually means something. You can't be serious, Harrington said, looking around the room as if expecting someone to back him up. Teaching someone requires a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. You can't force that. You can't mandate it through public pressure. Public pressure? Jessica Huang held up her phone. Vincent, in the 15 minutes since this confrontation started, the video I've been streaming has been viewed over 50,000 times. People are watching right now. They've seen Marcus play. They've heard your responses. The comments are, well, let's just say the court of public opinion has already reached a verdict. She began reading from her screen. This is everything wrong with classical music. That kid has more talent in his little finger than most professionals I've seen. Harrington is terrified of being shown up by a 14-year-old. This is why classical music is dying, gatekeepers like this guy. She looked up. Should I continue? Harrington's jaw clenched so tight Marcus could see the muscles jumping. Social media commentary from people who probably can't tell Mozart from Muzak is hardly. Actually, Dr. Crawford interrupted, I recognize several of those usernames. They're colleagues of mine, music professors, professional musicians, critics. The people whose opinions actually matter in your world, Vincent. And they're all watching to see what you do next. The maestro looked around the room, and Marcus could almost see him calculating the angles, weighing options. His career had been built on a carefully cultivated image, the brilliant artist who was also a champion of music education, the virtuoso who gave back through his foundation. But that image was crumbling in real time, exposed as a facade that only extended to people who looked and sounded right. Even if I wanted to teach you, which I'm not saying I do, it wouldn't work, Harrington said, turning back to Marcus. You live in the Bronx. I teach at my private studio in Manhattan, 3 times a week. The commitment alone would be impossible for someone in your situation. I'll make it work, Marcus said immediately. I'll take the subway. I'll do whatever it takes. And the instrument? My students need to practice on professional-grade pianos. That Casio keyboard of yours won't cut it. Then I'll practice more during my lessons. I'll find practice rooms. This is absurd, Harrington cut him off. You're talking about a commitment that would consume your entire life. What about school? What about your mother? She needs you to help support the family. Don't you dare use my son as an excuse, Janet said, her voice sharp as a whip. You don't get to pretend you're concerned about his well-being when what you really mean is that he's not worth the trouble. Marcus is a straight-A student. He helps me with everything he can. But if he has a chance, a real chance, to pursue his dream, I'll move heaven and earth to make it happen. We've survived worse than inconvenience. This isn't about inconvenience, Harrington said, and for the first time, he sounded tired rather than angry. This is about reality. Teaching isn't just about time and technique. It's about compatibility. About shared understanding. Marcus and I come from completely different worlds. How am I supposed to teach someone when I don't understand where they're coming from? Maybe that's exactly why you should, Richard Pemberton said. He'd been quiet for a while, but now he stood and approached the stage. Vincent, I'm going to be frank with you. As a major donor to the Harrington Foundation, I have significant influence over its direction. And I'm telling you right now, if you don't take Marcus as a student, I'm withdrawing my funding. All of it. $15 million over the next 5 years. Gone. The hall gasped. That was more than a threat, it was potentially crippling for the foundation. Harrington turned on Pemberton, his face red with fury. You can't blackmail me into. It's not blackmail, Pemberton said calmly. It's accountability. You've built an institution on the premise of supporting musical excellence. Well, here's excellence standing right in front of you, and you're trying to find every excuse to turn it away. That tells me the foundation isn't actually about excellence at all. It's about exclusivity. And I'm not interested in funding exclusivity dressed up as merit. I agree, Catherine Worthington stood as well. Vincent, I've pledged $20 million to the foundation over 10 years. Consider that pledge conditional on your acceptance of Marcus as a student. Not as charity. Not as some PR stunt. But as a genuine commitment to developing his talent, the same way you'd commit to any student you deemed worthy. Other voices began chiming in from around the hall. Major donors, board members, influential patrons, all of them suddenly finding their spines, perhaps emboldened by the social media attention, perhaps genuinely moved by what they'd witnessed. The foundation's reputation is at stake here, Vincent, one board member called out. How we handle this will define us for years to come. Harrington looked around the room, and Marcus could see the moment when he realized he was truly trapped. Not by force, but by the architecture of the very system he'd built, a system dependent on wealthy donors, public image, and the illusion of meritocracy. He'd been willing to use that system to maintain the status quo, never imagining it might one day be turned against him. But there was something else in his expression too, something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Was it resentment? Fear? Or was it, possibly, the smallest hint of curiosity? 2 years, Harrington said finally, his voice harsh. 2 years of lessons. 3 times per week, as with all my students. But understand this, Marcus Williams, I will not go easy on you. I will not make allowances for your background or your circumstances. If you want to be my student, you'll be held to exactly the same standards as everyone else I teach. Higher standards, actually, because you'll be starting so far behind. I understand, Marcus said, his heart racing. I don't think you do, Harrington said coldly. My current students have been playing since they were 4 or 5 years old. They've had the best teachers, the best instruments, unlimited practice time. They've attended summer programs with master teachers from around the world. You have 3 years of self-teaching and weekly lessons with a nice but unremarkable instructor. Do you understand how massive that gap is? Mrs. Chen isn't unremarkable, Marcus said quietly. She's the reason I'm here. Something flickered across Harrington's face, surprise, perhaps, at being contradicted. Be that as it may, you're walking into a situation where you'll be competing with students who have every advantage. I will compare you to them. I will judge you against their standards. And when you fail to meet those standards, which you inevitably will, I will not coddle you. I will tell you the truth, and the truth may be that you're not cut out for this level of performance. Can you handle that? Marcus thought about everything he'd already handled in his 14 years. Watching his father waste away in a hospital bed. Listening to his mother cry when she thought he was asleep. Enduring the mockery of classmates who thought his dreams were stupid. Fighting against every message society sent that people like him weren't supposed to want things like this. I can handle it, Marcus said. Then we start Monday, Harrington said abruptly. 6 p.m. at my studio. 435, West 57th Street. Don't be late. And for God's sake, get some proper sheet music. I won't have you reading from photocopies and computer screens. With that, Harrington turned and strode off the stage, leaving behind a hall full of stunned, murmuring people and one teenage boy who couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The next 72 hours passed in a blur that Marcus could barely process. Sunday morning, he woke to find his mother already up, sitting at their tiny kitchen table with her laptop open and papers spread everywhere. Mama? He rubbed his eyes, checking the clock. It was 6 a.m. What are you doing? Rearranging our lives, she said without looking up. I called Mr. Henderson at the hotel. Told him I need to switch to the early morning shift, 5 a.m. to noon. That way I can be here when you get home from Harrington's lessons. She made a note on one of the papers. Mrs. Chen called me last night. She says she'll help coordinate your practice schedule. There's a church in her neighborhood that has a piano in the basement. The pastor says you can use it in the evenings before your lessons. Mama, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She finally looked up at him, and her eyes were fierce. Marcus, you got this chance. I don't know if it'll lead anywhere, but you got it. And I'll be damned if we're going to waste it because I didn't do everything I could to support you. Marcus felt his throat tighten. What about Mr. Hastings? What about our jobs at the Grandview? Already quit, Janet said simply. Called him first thing this morning. He wasn't happy, but honestly, baby, working for people who look at us like we're invisible wasn't doing either of us any good. I've got another cleaning job lined up already. Mrs. Chen connected me with a family she knows. Better pay, better hours. But, no buts. She stood and walked over to him, placing her hands on his shoulders. Marcus, I need you to understand something. When your father was dying, the thing that killed me wasn't the cancer. It was watching him give up on his dreams. He wanted to be an engineer, did you know that? Smart as a whip with numbers and machines. But his family couldn't afford college, and by the time he could have gone back to school, we had you and bills and responsibilities. He never regretted choosing us, he told me that every day. But I saw something in his eyes sometimes, a kind of loss. She took a shaky breath. I won't watch that happen to you. I won't let you get to 50 years old and wonder what might have been. So you're going to work harder than you've ever worked in your life, and I'm going to support you every step of the way. Understood? Marcus hugged her tight. Yes, ma'am. Sunday afternoon, Mrs. Chen arrived at their apartment with an enormous bag full of sheet music, books on music theory, and a metronome that looked like it had survived at least 3 wars. Sit, she commanded, settling herself on their threadbare couch. We need to talk about what happens next. Marcus sat obediently. Mrs. Chen was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had the presence of someone 3 times her size. She'd been teaching piano in Chinatown for 40 years, and her students included several who'd gone on to conservatory programs, though never anyone quite like Marcus. Vincent Harrington is not a kind teacher, Mrs. Chen said bluntly. I trained at the San Francisco Conservatory with people who studied under him. He is brilliant, yes. But he is also ruthless. He will find your weaknesses and expose them. He will push you until you break, and then he will push harder to see if you can put yourself back together. I can handle it, Marcus said. Maybe. Maybe not. Mrs. Chen pulled out a thick book, The Complete Pianist, by Dean Zagay. But I can prepare you. Starting today, we work on fundamentals. Your technique is good for self-taught, but it has gaps. Harrington will find those gaps immediately. So we fix them now. They worked for 6 hours straight. Mrs. Chen was merciless, making Marcus repeat scales until his fingers cramped, correcting his posture with sharp taps of a ruler, drilling him on music theory until the term swam in his head. By the time she left at 8 p.m., Marcus was exhausted. "Tomorrow, you practice at the church," Mrs. Chen said at the door. 4 hours minimum. I will check with Pastor Williams. If he tells me you practiced less, I will know. Yes, ma'am. She paused, her stern expression softening slightly. Marcus, what you did Friday night, that took courage. More courage than I had at your age. But courage without preparation is just recklessness. Harrington gave you 2 years. That's not much time to close a 10-year gap. So you cannot waste a single day. Understand? I understand. Monday arrived too quickly. Marcus had barely slept, his mind racing with scenarios of what the first lesson might bring. He went to school in a daze, barely hearing his teachers, ignoring the whispers from classmates who'd seen the videos that had now gone massively viral. One video alone, Jessica Huang's live stream, had been viewed over 2 million times. Marcus's face was everywhere, social media, local news, even a segment on a national morning show. Marcus Williams, the 14-year-old piano prodigy from the Bronx who challenged classical music's establishment and won. But Marcus didn't feel like he'd won anything yet. He felt like he was standing at the base of Mount Everest being told he had to reach the summit, and everyone was watching to see if he'd fall. At 4:30 p.m., Marcus boarded the subway heading to Manhattan. He'd never been to the Upper West Side before, not really, not beyond passing through on his way to somewhere else. The buildings here were different from his neighborhood, elegant brownstones, doormen in uniform, restaurants with handwritten menus in the windows. Money whispered from every corner, subtle and assured. 435, West 57th Street was a beautiful pre-war building with an ornate facade. The lobby had marble floors and a chandelier that probably cost more than his entire apartment building. The doorman looked at Marcus with barely concealed skepticism. "I'm here to see Mr. Harrington," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I have a lesson at 6. The doorman checked his computer, eyebrows rising slightly. "Penthouse. Elevators that way." The elevator was one of those old-fashioned ones with a brass gate and wood paneling. It rose so smoothly Marcus barely felt it move. When the doors opened directly into Harrington's penthouse apartment, Marcus stepped out into a space that took his breath away. The apartment was vast, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, hardwood floors that gleamed like glass, and walls covered with photographs of Harrington with famous musicians, conductors, even presidents. But dominating the main room were 3 grand pianos, a Steinway Model D like the one at the Grandview, a Bosendorfer Imperial with its distinctive extra keys, and a Fazioli F278 that gleamed like liquid gold. "You're early. That's good." Marcus spun to find Harrington emerging from another room. The maestro was dressed casually now, slacks and a button-down shirt, but he still carried that aura of absolute authority. "Punctuality matters in this profession," Harrington continued. "Conductors won't wait for you. Neither will audiences." He gestured toward the Steinway. "Sit. Let's see what we're working with." Marcus approached the piano, his heart pounding. This was real. This was actually happening. "Before you play, some ground rules," Harrington said, pulling up a chair beside the piano bench. "First, when I'm teaching, you don't interrupt. You don't make excuses. You don't explain yourself unless I ask for explanation. You listen, you absorb, you execute. Clear?" "Yes, sir." "Second, what happens in this studio stays in this studio. I don't want you running to the press or social media every time you feel I'm being too hard on you. If you can't handle direct criticism, tell me now. I can handle it. We'll see. Harrington pulled out some sheet music. Play this. Sight reading. I want to see how quickly you process new material. It was a Czerny etude, not impossibly difficult, but tricky, with lots of rapid passages and unexpected modulations. Marcus took a moment to scan the music, then began to play. He made it through the first page reasonably well, but on the second page, he stumbled over a particularly complex left-hand pattern and had to stop. Keep going, Harrington said sharply. In performance, you don't get to stop and start over. You push through mistakes. Marcus continued, his face burning. He made several more errors, his fingers tripping over themselves. By the time he reached the end, he felt utterly defeated. Adequate sight reading for your level, Harrington said clinically. Which is to say, abysmal compared to where you need to be. My other students could sight read that piece perfectly the first time. You struggled with basic rhythm and completely missed several dynamic markings. I'm sorry, don't apologize. Fix it. Harrington stood and moved to the piano, pointing to a specific measure. Here. This passage. What's the time signature? 6/8. And you played it like it was in what? Marcus thought back. 4/4. Exactly. You imposed a different meter because that's what your ear expected. That's sloppy. It means you're not actually reading, you're guessing based on patterns you already know. Harrington flipped to another page. Play this section. Just these 8 measures. Slowly. I want to hear you count out loud. For the next 2 hours, Harrington systematically dismantled everything Marcus thought he knew about piano. Every technique was questioned, every habit examined and often found wanting. Harrington's criticisms were precise, devastatingly accurate, and delivered without any softening. Your 4th finger is weak. You're compensating by using your wrist incorrectly, which will lead to injury if you keep doing it. Your pedaling is muddy. You're holding the damper pedal down too long, letting harmonies blur together. You're rushing the tempo. You do it every time you feel uncertain. It's a tell that shows the audience you're not confident. By 7:30, Marcus's hands ached, his head hurt, and his confidence was in tatters. Everything he'd felt after Friday's triumph had evaporated. He wasn't a prodigy. He was a kid with delusions of grandeur, pretending he belonged in a world he clearly didn't understand. That's enough for today, Harrington said finally. Your assignment, practice that Czerny etude until you can play it perfectly, in tempo, with all correct dynamics and articulations. I want it memorized by Wednesday's lesson. Additionally, start working on Bach's Prelude and Fugue in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1. You'll need a solid Bach foundation for everything else. Yes, sir, Marcus said quietly. As he gathered his things to leave, Harrington spoke again, his voice slightly different, less harsh, though still not warm. Marcus. What I said Friday night, about you not belonging in this world, I meant it. You don't belong. Not yet. He paused. But the reason you don't belong isn't your skin color or your background. It's your training. Everything else is just noise. If you work, really work, you can close that gap. It won't be easy, and it won't be fair that you have to work harder than students who had every advantage. But it's possible. Marcus met his eyes. You think I can do it? I think if I didn't believe you could, I wouldn't be wasting my time. Harrington turned away. See you Wednesday. Don't be late. Marcus rode the subway home in a daze. When he walked into the apartment at 9 p.m., his mother took one look at his face and wrapped him in a hug. Bad? She asked. Brutal, Marcus admitted. Mama, I don't know if I can do this. He tore apart everything I played. Made me feel like I don't know anything. Good, his mother said firmly. That means he's taking you seriously. If he thought you were hopeless, he wouldn't bother pointing out what needs fixing. He'd just smile and tell you you're doing great. She pulled back to look at him. Your father used to say that the hardest teachers are the ones who see potential in you. The ones who don't see potential. They're always encouraging, always positive, because it doesn't matter to them whether you improve or not. But the teachers who push you until you want to quit? Those are the ones who believe you can be more than you are. Marcus thought about that as he ate a late dinner and then settled at the kitchen table with his keyboard. He practiced the Czerny etude until his fingers felt like they might fall off, then practiced some more. At midnight, his mother finally made him stop and go to bed. You've got school tomorrow, she reminded him. And practice at the church after. You need sleep. As Marcus lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he thought about what Harrington had said, you don't belong. Not yet. Not yet. That meant someday, maybe, he could. It wasn't much. But it was enough to hold on to. The next 8 weeks were the hardest of Marcus's life. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, he took the subway to Harrington's penthouse studio. Every lesson was a battle, not against Harrington, but against his own limitations, against the gaps in his training that seemed to yawn wider the more he learned. Week 2, Harrington introduced him to his other students. This is Christina Volkov, Harrington said, gesturing to a girl of about 16 with ice blonde hair and the kind of poise that came from a lifetime of privilege. Christina's been playing since she was 4. She won the junior division of the Montreal International Competition last year. Christina, this is Marcus Williams. He's been playing for 3 years. Christina's eyebrows rose in obvious disdain. 3 years? And he's studying with you? A temporary arrangement, Harrington said smoothly. I'm curious to see how quickly proper instruction can develop raw talent. Marcus felt like a specimen under a microscope as Christina played her piece, a Liszt etude so technically demanding that watching her fingers was like watching someone perform surgery. She was brilliant, flawless, and she knew it. When it was Marcus's turn, he played the Bach prelude he'd been working on. He made it through without major errors, but compared to Christina's Liszt, it sounded childishly simple. Competent, Harrington said when he finished. Your Bach is improving. Though I should mention that Christina learned that same prelude when she was 7. The comparison hung in the air like poison. Christina smirked. But Marcus noticed something else. Yes, Christina's playing was technically superior. But it was also cold. Perfect but emotionless, like a computer program to play the notes but not understand their meaning. He didn't say anything, he'd learned that lesson, but he filed the observation away. Week 4, disaster struck. Marcus arrived at Harrington's studio to find 2 men he didn't recognize sitting in the corner with cameras. His stomach dropped. Documentary crew, Harrington explained. They're filming a project about my teaching method. You'll ignore them. But Marcus couldn't ignore them. Knowing he was being recorded made him self-conscious, and self-consciousness made him tense. When he played his prepared piece, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, his fingers felt like wooden sticks. He made mistakes he'd never made in practice, fumbled passages he could normally play in his sleep. Stop, Harrington said after the second page. You're playing like a frightened rabbit. What's wrong with you? The cameras will be at every major performance you ever give, Harrington cut him off. Do you think concert pianists only play when there are no cameras? This is the profession, Marcus. People watching, judging, recording. If you can't handle 2 cameramen in a practice studio, how will you handle Carnegie Hall? I just need to. You need to develop mental toughness. Harrington stood and walked to the piano. You know what separates great performers from mediocre ones? It's not talent. Talent is common. It's the ability to perform under pressure, to shut out distractions, to execute when everything in your brain is screaming at you that you're about to fail. That's what you lack. He gestured to the cameras. These men will be here for the next month. Get used to them. And if you can't play under these conditions, maybe you're not cut out for this after all. The words stung worse than any technical criticism. Marcus forced himself to start again, and this time he made it through, though not well. The rest of the lesson was excruciating. On the subway home, Marcus pulled out his phone and found dozens of messages waiting. The documentary crew's presence had leaked online, and people were already speculating about whether Marcus was succeeding or failing. Bet Harrington's making his life hell. Kids probably ready to quit. This is what happens when you let amateurs into professional spaces. Marcus turned off his phone and stared out the subway window at the darkness rushing past. The anonymous commenter might be right. Maybe he was ready to quit. But then he remembered Christina's cold, perfect list. He remembered Harrington's words, "Talent is common." He remembered his mother's face when she told him about his father's lost dreams. He wasn't going to quit. Week 6 brought a different kind of challenge. Concert in 2 weeks, Harrington announced at the start of the lesson. Small venue, invitation-only audience. About 200 people. All 4 of my students will perform. You'll each play a 10-minute program of your choice. Start planning. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. A concert? But I'm not ready. You're never ready, Harrington said. That's not the point. The point is to expose you to performance pressure in a controlled environment. Pick your pieces and start preparing. I'd suggest sticking to what you know well. This isn't the time for ambitious new repertoire. But Marcus didn't want to play it safe. He'd spent 6 weeks being the weakest student, the charity case, the experiment that might or might not work. He wanted to prove something, to Harrington, to Christina and the other students, to everyone watching online. So instead of choosing safe pieces, he selected a program that was just beyond his current ability, Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 16 in C major, the famous Sonata Facile, though it was only easy, compared to Mozart's other works, Debussy's Clair de Lune, and, because he couldn't resist, a brief piece by Scott Joplin, Maple Leaf Rag. When he told Harrington his selections, the maestro frowned. The Joplin? Why? Because it's part of my heritage, Marcus said quietly. Because Scott Joplin was a black composer who created something beautiful and original, and most classical music programs ignore him completely. Because if I'm going to perform, I want to perform music that means something to me. Harrington studied him for a long moment. The classical music establishment doesn't take ragtime seriously. Maybe that's the problem with the classical music establishment. For the first time in 6 weeks, Harrington smiled, not warmly, exactly, but with something that might have been respect. Fair enough. But that piece needs to be absolutely perfect. Ragtime is technically demanding, and people will be looking for any excuse to dismiss it as inferior music. Don't give them ammunition. I won't. Marcus practiced like a demon for the next 2 weeks. 4 hours a day at the church piano, another 2 hours on his keyboard at home, drilling the pieces until he could play them in his sleep. Mrs. Chen worked with him on the Mozart, helping him understand the classical period style and phrasing. His mother listened to him play the Debussy so many times she started humming it while doing dishes. The night of the concert arrived. The venue was a small recital hall in the Manhattan School of Music, intimate, elegant, with excellent acoustics. The audience was exactly who Harrington had promised: music professionals, wealthy patrons, a few journalists, and, of course, cameras. Marcus watched from backstage as Christina performed first. She played Rachmaninoff's Moment Musical No. 4 with stunning technical precision, her fingers flying across the keys in the virtuosic passages. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Then came David Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, who played Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata with serious, focused intensity. More applause. Then Elizabeth Martinez, performing Schumann's Carnival with romantic flair and impressive stamina. The piece lasted nearly half an hour. Finally, Marcus's turn. He walked onto the stage, acutely aware of his slightly too short pants. He'd grown 2 inches in the past 6 weeks, his shoes that weren't quite formal enough, his presence as the only black performer on the program. He sat at the piano and took a breath. Then he began to play Mozart. The Sonata Facile wasn't the flashiest piece on the program, but Marcus played it with clean, precise articulation, honoring the classical period's elegance while adding subtle interpretive choices that made it his own. He let the music breathe, giving space to the phrases, allowing Mozart's genius to speak without unnecessary ornamentation. When he finished the first piece, the applause was polite, appreciative. Good, but not overwhelming. Then he played Debussy's Clair de Lune. This was his moment to show what he'd learned about tone and color and atmosphere. The piece required delicate touch, careful pedaling, and an understanding of impressionistic harmony that was very different from the classical clarity of Mozart. Marcus poured himself into it, remembering the moonlight through his bedroom window on nights when he couldn't sleep, remembering the strange beauty of the city at 3 a.m. when the streets were quiet and anything felt possible. The final notes faded into silence, and this time the applause was warmer, more genuine. He'd connected with the audience. Now for the risky part. My final piece is Maple Leaf Rag by Scott Joplin, Marcus announced, his voice steady despite his nerves. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was unexpected, unconventional. He could see Harrington in the front row, his expression unreadable. Marcus began to play, and immediately the energy in the room changed. Ragtime was different from anything that had been played that evening, syncopated, rhythmic, joyful. It required precision in the stride bass and perfect synchronization between the hands, but it also required something else, swing, soul, an understanding of African American musical tradition. Marcus played it the way Joplin had intended, not rushed, not treated like a novelty, but with the same respect and artistry he'd given to Mozart and Debussy. He played it like it belonged on this stage, in this hall, as part of this tradition. When he finished with the rag's triumphant final chords, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then the audience erupted. People stood, not everyone, but many. The applause was louder than it had been for any other performer that evening. Marcus could see surprised faces, moved faces, and a few uncomfortable faces that didn't want to admit they'd enjoyed music they'd been taught to dismiss. He looked at Harrington. The maestro wasn't applauding quite as enthusiastically as some others, but he was nodding slowly, and his expression had changed. There was calculation there, yes, but also something else. Recognition, perhaps. That Marcus wasn't just a talented student to be molded. He was an artist with his own voice, his own vision. As Marcus walked off stage, Christina intercepted him. "That was unexpected," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Thank you. I didn't say it was good. Just unexpected." But her eyes said something different. For the first time, she was looking at him not as a curiosity or an experiment, but as a competitor. "Marcus." Harrington appeared behind him. "My office. Now." Marcus's heart sank. He followed Harrington to a small office backstage, bracing himself for criticism. Instead, Harrington closed the door and said, "That was a risk." "Yes, sir." It paid off. The Joplin was well executed, and more importantly, it showed artistic courage. "You made a statement." Harrington sat on the edge of the desk. "Do you know what you did out there?" "I played 3 pieces." "You challenged the narrative. Everyone expected you to be the struggling underdog, the kid who's trying hard but can't quite measure up. Instead, you showed them something they didn't expect: confidence, artistry, a point of view. That matters more than technical perfection, though we still have a lot of work to do on that front." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. "Does that mean?" "It means you're no longer the weakest student I teach," Harrington said. "You're still behind Christina in technique and David in musical maturity. But you have something they don't: hunger. They've had success handed to them their entire lives. You've had to fight for every inch. That makes you dangerous." He stood and moved toward the door. One more thing. After tonight's performance, I've received 3 inquiries from people wanting to feature you in articles or documentaries. I've declined them all. Why? Because right now, you're the feel-good story, the poor kid who got a chance. But feel-good stories have short shelf lives. People will get bored, or they'll turn on you when you make mistakes. What I want for you is something longer-lasting, a career. Not fame. Not 15 minutes of social media attention. A real career as a serious musician. That takes time and work away from the spotlight. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good. Now go celebrate with your mother. You earned it tonight. The concert changed something. Marcus could feel it in Harrington's studio, in the way Christina and the other students interacted with him, in the questions he started receiving from the documentary crew. He wasn't a charity project anymore. He was a pianist worth taking seriously. But with that recognition came new pressures. Marcus, we need to talk about next steps, Harrington said during a lesson in week 10. Your 2-year commitment is just beginning, but I'm already thinking about your trajectory. Have you considered what comes after? After these lessons. After you've developed your technique to a competitive level. What do you want from this? A performance career? Teaching? Something else? Marcus hadn't let himself think that far ahead. Surviving each lesson, improving each week, that had been enough. I want to perform, he said finally. I want to play in real concert halls, for real audiences. I want to prove that someone like me can make it in this world. Harrington nodded slowly. Then you need to understand something. Performance careers don't just happen. They're built through a specific path, conservatory training, competition wins, building relationships with conductors and concert presenters. You're already behind on that path. Most students start building those credentials at 16 or 17. You're 14 with limited performance experience. So what do I do? You accelerate. You start entering competitions next year, small ones at first, building your competition experience. You need to audition for pre-college programs at major conservatories, get exposure to their faculty and resources. And you need to broaden your repertoire significantly. Right now, you have perhaps 20 pieces you can perform reasonably well. Professional pianists have hundreds in their repertoire. The mountain of work ahead suddenly felt crushing. That's a lot. Yes. Which is why I need to know if you're truly committed. Because if you're serious about this, your life is going to change dramatically. Less time with friends. Less normal teenage activities. Everything focused on piano. Is that what you want? Marcus thought about his classmates at school, the ones who hung out after classes, went to movies, had time for video games and social media and normal teenage life. He'd already given up most of that, but Harrington was talking about something more extreme, a complete dedication that would set him apart even more than he already was. Yes, Marcus said. That's what I want. Then we need to have a conversation with your mother. 2 days later, Marcus, his mother, and Harrington sat in the penthouse studio. Janet had taken time off work for this meeting, and Marcus could see the exhaustion in her face, the strain of the schedule she'd been maintaining to support his lessons. Mrs. Williams, Harrington began, Marcus has significant potential. You already know that. But what you may not fully understand is what it takes to develop that potential into a professional career. I need to be frank with you about the challenges ahead. I'm listening, Janet said, her voice wary. First, the time commitment will increase. Right now, Marcus is practicing 5 to 6 hours per day. That needs to become 6 to 8 hours. That's on top of school, homework, and lessons with me. It's not sustainable without some changes. What kind of changes? Have you considered homeschooling? Or online school? It would give Marcus more flexibility in his schedule and allow him to focus more intensely on music. Janet's expression hardened. Mr. Harrington, my son is 14. He needs more than just piano in his life. He needs friends, normal experiences, a well-rounded education. I'm not suggesting he becomes a piano-playing robot, Harrington interrupted gently. I'm suggesting we structure his education to support his goals. Many serious music students do this. They still get excellent educations, it's just more focused. And if his goals change? If he decides at 17 that he doesn't want to perform professionally? Then what? He's got an education that's been entirely built around something he doesn't want anymore. Harrington nodded. That's a valid concern. But I'll be honest, if Marcus is going to compete with students who've had every advantage, who've been training intensively since early childhood, he needs to commit fully now. Half measures won't close the gap. It's not a half measure to want my son to have a childhood. Janet's voice rose. It's not a half measure to want him to learn about history and literature and science, not just piano. Mama. Marcus touched her arm. I want this. I want to do whatever it takes. You're 14, baby. You don't know what you want 10 years from now. But I know what I want now. And if I don't try, I'll always wonder. Janet looked between her son and Harrington, her face showing the terrible weight of the decision. Finally, she spoke. I'm not pulling him out of regular school. I'm just not. But. She took a breath. I'll support him homeschooling 2 days a week if he can keep his grades up and if he makes time for at least some normal activities. Deal? Deal, Marcus said immediately. Mrs. Williams, there's one more thing. Harrington hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Money. Marcus needs access to better practice facilities, better instruments. He needs to attend summer intensives, which have tuition and living costs. He needs proper concert attire for performances. These things add up quickly. I can work more hours, Janet began. No. Harrington held up a hand. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that we apply for scholarships and grants. There are resources available for talented students from underserved communities. And. He paused. The Harrington Foundation is prepared to offer Marcus a scholarship covering all necessary expenses related to his musical education. Marcus's eyes widened. Janet's did too. Why would you do that? Janet asked suspiciously. What's the catch? No catch. Just. Harrington struggled for words, maybe a realization that I've been part of a system that makes this career path unnecessarily difficult for students who don't have money. I can't change the entire system, but I can help one student navigate it. If you'll let me. Janet stared at him for a long moment. You really believe he can make it? This isn't just some experiment or some way to look good for those documentaries. Mrs. Williams, I've taught piano for 25 years. I've worked with hundreds of students. Most of them were talented. Some were exceptional. But Marcus has something rare. He has talent, yes, but he also has perspective. He understands what music means because it's meant something to him beyond just achievement or career. That understanding, combined with his work ethic, yes, I believe he can make it. I wouldn't be investing this time and money if I didn't. Janet wiped her eyes. Then I guess we're doing this. The next 6 months transformed Marcus's life in ways he couldn't have imagined. Homeschooling 2 days a week gave him more practice time, but it also isolated him further from his peers at regular school. The friends he'd had started drifting away, they had less and less in common, and Marcus simply didn't have time for hanging out. His relationship with Christina evolved from hostile to competitive to something approaching mutual respect. During a lesson where they both worked on different Chopin etudes, she suddenly said, "You're getting better. Actually better, not just charity case better." Thanks, I think. It's annoying, actually. I've been training for 12 years, and you're catching up in less than a year. Makes me wonder if I've been wasting time. You haven't, Marcus said. You're still way better than me technically. But you make people feel things when you play. I'm trying to figure out how you do that. It was the first real conversation they'd had, and it led to others. Christina started sharing practice tips, recommending recordings, even inviting Marcus to attend a concert with her and her parents. They weren't exactly friends, but they weren't enemies either. Week 24 brought Marcus's first real competition, the Young Artists Piano Competition, a regional event that attracted about 50 competitors in his age division. Harrington prepared him intensively, but he was also brutally honest. "You're going to lose," Harrington said flatly the week before the competition. "Your technique still isn't polished enough to beat students who've been competing for years. But that's not the point. The point is to get experience, to learn what competition feels like, to start building your mental toughness." Harrington was right. Marcus didn't place in the top 3. He didn't even make it past the preliminary round. Watching other students perform pieces far beyond his current ability, seeing their confidence and polish, was humbling. But it also lit a fire. Next time, Marcus told Harrington on the subway ride home, "I'm going to win." "Maybe," Harrington said. "Or maybe you'll come in second. Or third. The point isn't always winning. It's continual improvement." "No," Marcus said firmly. "Next time, I'm winning." 6 months later, at the end of the first year of study, Harrington organized another recital for his students. This time, Marcus chose a much more ambitious program: Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, First Movement, Ravel's Pavane pour un Infante Defunt, and Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. The Liszt was a risk, a showpiece known for its extreme technical demands, its rapid octaves, its bravura passages that could make or break a performer. Christina had tried to talk him out of it. "That piece takes years to master. You've had 1 year of real training. You're going to crash and burn." "Maybe. But I'm going to try." The night of the recital, Marcus sat backstage listening to the other students perform. They'd all chosen ambitious programs. This was the end-of-year showcase, the chance to demonstrate growth. But Marcus noticed something. They were all playing it safe within their ambition, choosing pieces that stretched them but didn't risk complete failure. Marcus had chosen a piece that could very easily end in disaster. When his turn came, he walked onto the stage with his heart pounding but his head clear. He'd practiced the Liszt until his fingers had blisters, until he could play it in his sleep, until every note was muscle memory. He began the Beethoven and played it with power and passion, honoring the pathetic name, playing the pathos, the drama, the revolutionary spirit of Beethoven's innovation. The Ravel he performed with delicate beauty, understanding the piece's memorial nature, a pavane for a dead princess, music of elegant sorrow. Then came the Liszt. Marcus launched into the Hungarian Rhapsody with everything he had. The opening slow section, the Lassen, he played with appropriate weight and drama, setting up the contrast. Then came the Friska, the fast section, and Marcus unleashed. His fingers flew across the keyboard, the rapid passages, the thundering octaves, the climactic runs. There were moments when he wasn't entirely sure he'd make it. His hands were moving so fast he couldn't consciously control each note. He had to trust the practice, trust the preparation. The final climax approached, the section where many performers failed, where the octaves came so fast and furious that hands could seize up from tension. Marcus pushed through, his arms feeling like rubber, his fingers screaming in protest. And then, the final crashing chords. He lifted his hands from the keys, breathing hard, and looked up. The audience was on its feet, every single person. The applause was thunderous, genuine, shocked. Even Harrington was standing, a rare smile on his face. Marcus had done it. Not perfectly, he'd made small errors that he knew about, places where the octaves weren't quite clean or the rhythm slightly rushed. But he'd done it. He'd taken on a piece that should have been beyond him and made it work. As he walked off stage, Harrington met him in the wings. 1 year ago, the maestro said quietly, "You were a self-taught kid playing on a broken keyboard. Tonight, you performed Liszt at a level that many conservatory students never reach. Do you understand what you've accomplished? Marcus nodded, unable to speak through the emotion. Your 2-year commitment ends next year, Harrington continued. But I don't think we're done. Not by a long shot. If you're willing to continue, I'd like to keep teaching you. Not as a charity project, not as an experiment. As a serious artist with real potential. Yes, Marcus managed. Yes, I want that. Good. Because next year, we're going for competition wins. Real ones. And then. Harrington smiled, then we start talking about your future career. 18 months after that first night at the Grandview Center, Marcus Williams stood backstage at the Young Artists International Piano Competition Finals. This wasn't a regional competition anymore, this was the real deal, with competitors from 15 countries and a first prize that included a professional recording contract and bookings at major concert halls. He was 16 now, taller, more confident, though still carrying that hungry edge that Harrington said made him dangerous. The past 18 months had been a relentless grind of practice, lessons, competitions, and growth. He'd won 3 smaller competitions, placed highly in 2 others, and earned a full scholarship to a prestigious pre-conservatory summer program. But this competition was different. This was the one that could actually launch a career. Marcus Williams, 5 minutes to stage. His mother squeezed his hand. She'd taken the day off work to be here, dressed in her best outfit, her pride and anxiety warring on her face. You've got this, baby, she whispered. Mrs. Chen stood on his other side. Remember what we worked on. Trust your preparation. Play the music, not the competition. Harrington appeared, immaculate as always in his suit. Over the past 2 years, their relationship had evolved into something Marcus couldn't quite define, not quite father-son, not quite friendship, but something built on mutual respect and shared dedication to the art. You're ready, Harrington said simply. You've worked harder than anyone else here. Now go show them what that work produces. Marcus walked onto the stage of the Lincoln Center's Alice Tully Hall. 2,000 seats, all filled. Cameras everywhere. A jury of famous pianists and music educators sitting in the front rows, clipboards ready. He sat at the Steinway, a different one from the Grandview, but just as magnificent. 2 years ago, he'd been intimidated by instruments like this. Now it felt like coming home. His competition program, Bach's Prelude and Fugue in C-sharp major from the Well-Tempered Clavier, to demonstrate Baroque clarity and counterpoint, Schumann's Kinderszenen, for romantic expression and character, and Prokofiev's Piano Sonata No. 7, second movement, for modern technique and power. It was a program designed to showcase everything he'd learned, every skill he developed, every transformation he'd undergone. He began with the Bach. 2 years ago, he'd played Bach's C major prelude at his first lesson with Harrington and been told his technique was fundamentally flawed. Now, he played the far more complex C-sharp major with crystalline clarity, each voice in the fugue distinct and perfectly balanced, the mathematical beauty of Bach's counterpoint revealed through precise execution and deep musical understanding. The Schumann came next, 13 short pieces, each a miniature world. Marcus played them with the narrative sense he'd developed, understanding that these weren't just standalone pieces but a journey through childhood's joys and sorrows. He made each piece speak, made the audience see the scenes Schumann had imagined. Then came the Prokofiev, brutal, modern, demanding every ounce of technique and power he possessed. The second movement of the Seventh Sonata was known as one of the most physically demanding pieces in the repertoire, requiring endurance, precision, and absolute control at extremely high speeds. Marcus attacked it with confidence born from hundreds of hours of practice. His hands moved with machine-like precision through passages that had once seemed impossible. The power of the Steinway combined with his evolved technique produced a sound that filled the enormous hall, commanding attention, demanding respect. The final measures, massive chords, thundering bass, the piece driving to its relentless conclusion. Marcus played the last notes and lifted his hands from the keys. Silence. Then eruption. The audience leaped to their feet. The applause was deafening. Marcus could see faces in the crowd, people crying, people shouting, people applauding so hard it looked painful. He could see Harrington standing, his expression showing something Marcus had never seen before, genuine emotion, perhaps even tears. The jury was conferring, their heads together. They hadn't applauded yet, they never did until after all deliberation was complete, but Marcus could see their expressions. They were impressed. 3 hours later, after all competitors had performed and the jury had deliberated, Marcus stood on stage with 9 other finalists. His heart pounded as the chief juror approached the microphone. "This year's competition has been exceptional," the juror said. "We've heard remarkable talent from around the world. Our decision was not easy." She began announcing the winners in reverse order. Third place, a 17-year-old from South Korea. Second place, a 16-year-old from Russia. Marcus's hands were shaking. He'd be happy with third place, thrilled with second, but first place, that was the dream that could change everything. "And our first place winner, the gold medalist of this year's Young Artists International Piano Competition." The juror paused for effect, smiling. "Marcus Williams from New York City." The world seemed to explode. The audience roared. Marcus felt his knees go weak. The chief juror was saying something about his extraordinary artistic maturity and technical prowess combined with deep musical understanding, but Marcus barely heard it through the ringing in his ears. He accepted the trophy, smiled for photos, shook hands with the jury. But what he really wanted was to find his mother. She was waiting in the wings, openly crying. When she saw him, she ran forward and grabbed him in a hug so tight he could barely breathe. "I'm so proud of you," she sobbed. "So proud. Your father would be, he would be." "I know, Mama. I know." Mrs. Chen was there too, beaming through her own tears. "I told you," she said. "I told you that you had something special. You just needed to work for it." And then Harrington, standing slightly apart, watching the scene with an expression Marcus had learned to read over 2 years of intensive study. "Thank you," Marcus said simply. "For everything. For giving me a chance when you didn't have to. For pushing me when I wanted to quit. For believing I could do this even when I didn't believe it myself." Harrington cleared his throat. "I didn't do anything except teach you what you were willing to learn. The work was all yours, Marcus. The talent was always there. I just helped you refine it." "That first night at the Grandview," Marcus said, "you told me I didn't belong in this world. I remember. Do I belong now?" Harrington looked at him steadily. "You never needed my permission to belong, Marcus. That was the lesson I should have learned earlier. This world, classical music, performance, all of it, doesn't belong to people like me just because we've traditionally controlled access to it. It belongs to anyone with the passion and dedication to master it. You proved that. Not just to me, but to everyone." The reception after the competition was held in a grand hall filled with music industry professionals, agents, managers, representatives from recording companies. Marcus found himself surrounded by people wanting to talk to him, to offer opportunities, to be associated with his success. But the most meaningful conversation came from an unexpected source. Kristina Volkov approached him, elegant as always, but her expression was different from the disdain she'd shown 2 years earlier. "Congratulations," she said. "You deserve to win." "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. I need to tell you something." Kristina looked uncomfortable, a rare expression for her. "When you first started studying with Vincent, I thought it was a joke. I thought he was making some political statement, taking on a student like you. I didn't think you'd last a month, and honestly, I kind of looked forward to watching you fail." Marcus said nothing, letting her continue. "But you didn't fail. You worked harder than anyone I've ever seen. And somewhere along the way, you made me realize something about myself." She paused. I've been given every advantage, the best teachers, the best instruments, unlimited support. And I've been good, but I've never been great. You know why? Because I was never hungry. I never had to be. Everything came easy, so I never learned to really fight for it. Christina, let me finish. Watching you these past 2 years, watching you struggle and grow and push yourself to limits I've never had to test, it changed how I approach music. I'm never going to have your hunger. But I can have my own drive, my own purpose. So thank you. For showing me what real dedication looks like. She extended her hand. Marcus shook it, and they stood there for a moment, two young musicians from completely different worlds, brought together by art and discipline and the strange journey they'd shared. 3 months later, Marcus gave his first professional recital at a small but prestigious venue in Manhattan. The program included pieces from his competition win plus some additions, including, at his insistence, another Scott Joplin rag and a piece by Florence Price, the first African-American woman to have a symphony performed by a major orchestra. The audience was diverse in a way that classical music audiences rarely were, people from his neighborhood in the Bronx, students from his old school, the entire congregation from Pastor Williams's church, alongside the usual classical music patrons. It was exactly the audience Marcus wanted to play for, people who loved music, regardless of whether they understood the technical intricacies. Before he began, Marcus stood and spoke to the audience, something professional pianists rarely did in formal recitals. 2 years ago, I stood on a stage not far from here and challenged one of the greatest pianists of our generation. I didn't challenge him because I thought I was better than him, I knew I wasn't. I challenged him because I needed to know if someone like me could belong in this world. If the music I loved could love me back. He looked out at the audience, at all the faces watching him, black, white, Asian, Latino, old, young, wealthy, working class. What I've learned is that music doesn't care where you come from or what you look like or how much money your family has. Music only cares whether you're willing to work for it, to dedicate yourself to it, to let it transform you. And if you do that, if you really commit, then you already belong. You always belonged. You just had to prove it to yourself. He sat at the piano. This recital is dedicated to my father, who taught me to dream, to my mother, who taught me to work, to Mrs. Chen, who taught me to learn, and to Vincent Harrington, who taught me that belonging isn't about permission. It's about excellence. Marcus began to play, and the music filled the hall, Bach and Beethoven, yes, but also Joplin and Price, Debussy and Prokofiev, a program that celebrated the full breadth of piano literature without bowing to the gatekeepers who insisted on a narrow definition of what belonged in a classical recital. As he played the final piece, Beethoven's Ode to Joy arranged for solo piano, Marcus thought about that night 2 years ago. The terrified boy who'd accepted an impossible challenge. The maid's son who dared to touch a piano he supposedly didn't deserve to play. That boy was gone, transformed by countless hours of practice, by the discipline of true artistry, by the realization that talent without work was nothing, but work with dedication could accomplish anything. The final notes faded. The audience rose as one, applauding not just the performance but everything it represented, the possibility that America's promise of opportunity might actually mean something, that barriers could be broken, that excellence could come from anywhere if given the chance to develop. In the front row, Vincent Harrington stood and applauded. Their eyes met across the space, and Marcus saw in his teacher's face not just pride but recognition. Recognition that their journey together had changed them both, the student who'd learned to claim his place in the world, and the teacher who'd learned that gatekeeping was the opposite of greatness. Marcus bowed, feeling the weight and wonder of the moment. He'd started this journey trying to prove he belonged. He ended it understanding that he'd always belonged. The only question had ever been whether the world was ready to see it. Now they had no choice but to see. The maid's son had become a musician. And the music world would never be quite the same. Dear friend, Marcus's story is more than just one young man's triumph, it's a reminder that talent exists everywhere, in every community, waiting for the opportunity to bloom. How many potential Marcusas are out there right now, practicing on broken keyboards, dreaming of stages they're told they don't belong on, fighting against systems designed to keep them out? Excellence has no color, no zip code, no bank account requirement. But opportunity does. The question we must ask ourselves is this: are we willing to open doors for those who have the dedication and the dream, even when they don't look like the people who've traditionally walked through those doors? Marcus challenged a system. But more importantly, he challenged us all to see talent where we've been trained not to look, to value dedication over privilege, and to remember that art belongs to anyone willing to fight for it. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can share more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the power of determination and the beauty of giving everyone a chance to shine. Don't let this message stop with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.